Welcome into another edition of G-Rated, where we talk about our favorite TV shows and movies. I'm your host, Gerald Bourget, and we have a heartfelt goodbye to one of our favorite, most uplifting shows over the last few years to talk about today with Ted Lasso. I'm joined by Saul, Derek, and Max. Guys, I know a lot of people have had, including us on this panel, have had mixed feelings about this season, and we'll get into that. But just in terms of the season finale, what were your thoughts?
I mean, it's a season finale, not necessarily a series finale, because
Yes.
they didn't say that yet.
Right.
It's a season finale, not so much of a series finale yet. I don't know. Like, I liked it. It wasn't like high level. It wasn't like, again, sometimes I just feel like I know you're supposed to fit everything into an hour window. It's okay to go over a little bit, just like we do on our shows. Like, if you got more to do, then do it.
Yeah.
And I think some of the little parts were kind of condensed, really quickly run through. But I thought overall it did its job.
I feel like the overall story was Ted's connection to everybody, right? So like they tried to give us that. Like they tried to show how people have changed and everything just in the time that he was here. It felt for me like I really liked the finale. I cried throughout the whole thing, so I'm not going to act like I didn't get emotional and stuff, right? But if I'm trying to be analytical about it, it felt like two things. Like one, they were trying to kind of almost like spin off the show in a way. Like they were trying to establish the other characters throughout the season, even in the finale, so much that it kind of feels like they weren't really doing a full-on series finale. And like you said, we still don't know if that's the case with this.
Go ahead, Max. We're fine.
There's so much to say about this season, the series as a whole. For the finale, I think it was interesting watching this entire season play out, leading to how the final match day would go, where Richmond would finish, everything like that, and really just to see where the characters went. Thought all made sense. I think it was something that it satisfied me as a viewer of like, hey, these people ended up where they were and all that stuff. I'm not going to get as dark with this comparison, but hear me out. It felt a little bit like the How I Met Your Mother series finale, in the vibe of like they condensed a lot of stuff in there all at once, and I kind of was left feeling like, what did I just watch, and trying to piece it all together.
I vehemently disagree with that. Because when How I Met Your Mother ended, I physically wanted to punch a hole through the TV. It's like, really? You set this whole thing up just so these two people could get back together at the end?
Yeah.
Who they were together at the beginning? Like, this doesn't make sense. With Ted Lasso, not so much. And regarding Derek's spinoff point, Rebecca, to me, is probably the only one that I felt like maybe there's something there to spin off with. I didn't feel like any other character really had the gravity to be able to spin off and have their own show or run Ted Lasso from their perspective. I mean, Ted is the glue. Yeah. He's the glue that holds everybody together, and he's the one that really, he's the one that makes you feel good. He's the one that you really buy into from top to bottom, and you love the other characters. They're great, but they're great accessories. I just don't feel like anybody's like the focus.
No, and I think that's probably what it would be like Richmond would be the name of the show or something like that. Just kind of like the way the book title was changed to be the Richmond way instead of the Lasso way, right? But I think that the collection of characters there, it just felt like, and I think you said it at one point, like this last season just didn't have enough Ted in it. Like it focused so much on the other characters that's what I felt like they were establishing, is the ability for this show to continue without him. And I don't know if it should, because it would feel very much like The Office without Steve Carell. Like I feel like this show, the Jason Sudeikis is the spirit of the show. He's the thing that we all kind of love about it. Yeah. And it's not to say we don't like the other characters, but he very much is the heart and soul of this show. And without him, it would feel kind of empty.
I mean, even so, you point to Rebecca, and we're always growing as people. We never stop. But even towards that end, and even in the series finale, it's almost kind of like, okay, well, she's over Rupert. She's sold half the club to the fans. She's achieved everything from an emotional, financial standpoint that seemingly she was chasing very early on in the season. I agree with you, Saul, that she would probably be the only logical person you can go with. But I don't see any way how you can. Yeah. There's no one else that's a key like link to me.
They just kept the cast all together. The way that Beard stayed and the way they're all having that lovely little like picnic in Rebecca, or the little like, you know, Sunday afternoon barbecue in Rebecca's front yard. That's especially what made me feel like, wow, maybe this is what they were working towards. But maybe the case might be that they're not ending the show at all. That was just kind of what was said in the beginning, but I never really heard them talk about that at any point this season, like as far as production standpoint or anything like that.
So heading into the season, it very much felt like, I think they had said we had planned on 3 seasons. We were going to tell our story and get out, but they definitely left the door open because we didn't get any resolution on kind of the Roy, Jamie, Keely love triangle. Obviously they're creating the women's team. Even the last frame where Ted is like looking directly at the camera, like, see how far we've come, like that kind of final shot, it like leaves the door open. And I think he said on a late night talk show that like you need to pay attention to the books that Ted is reading. And on the airplane when he's about to fly home, the book that he's reading is How to Change Your Mind. So it feels like it's like a subtle wink, like maybe we changed our mind on 3 seasons. Maybe we're not done with this show. So my question to you guys is, do you feel like the show should end it now and go out where it does? Or, I mean, we would all watch like a season 4 or probably a spinoff. We would check it out out of curiosity. But for the sake of preserving the art, would you prefer for it to go out now?
Season 3, you could feel was a little bit different than season 1 and 2. Even just the camera quality, in my opinion, like it was just a little bit different. It was less cinematic. It felt like it was more like NBC show as opposed to cinema. And the storylines were great. I liked season 3. Thought there was a lot of feel good moments in season 3. A lot of come to Jesus moments for a lot of characters, which was great. But I'm not so sure I need a season 4. And that's a hard thing to say because I love this show so much. I'm good with where it's at. And so I might watch out of curiosity, but I don't really need it. Now, numbers will tell otherwise, and that's what usually drives this money. But I'm good with the way it ended.
I agree with you. I think that even people that found the final season to be kind of cheesy or hokey, like, I mean, the overall story, if you look at it as like one solid movie, is your standard kind of like, I guess, 90s sports movie where like, in the end they win and everything kind of works out. And like, sometimes we need that. I mean, I don't think every show needs to be something where there's like a twist or the reality is like, that things are sad or sometimes things don't work out. Like this show has always been uplifting from the beginning. That's kind of been the point of it existing. I mean, Ted's just constant positivity in the face of all of that adversity and all of that questioning him of leaving the United States and doing this whole thing. Like it comes back around to this final episode where it starts off with him walking down the street and everybody is like, loves him. Everybody loves him. Ted, hey, Ted, hey, and all that. Like, and it was just such a funny juxtaposition from where he was in the beginning of the season where he walked down the street
Wanka.
And people are calling him a wanker, right? So it's like, I like things like that they did in the final episode. And overall, it's like you said, I felt like it was complete. I even felt like some things got stretched out in the final season just to make maybe a little bit more of a storyline. And maybe that's where we felt like, hey, they're not featuring Ted enough. Well, they also have to finish up this season. And Ted's story, even though it's not completely told from their perspective, has kind of been told quite a bit. I did like finding out his relationship with Beard, though, in the final episode and how they came to be so close. Yes. Like that was a great little thing at the end.
There were a lot of tie-ins to season 1 to earlier episodes in the finale and the final season in general. Even the guy that he got an Ussie with at the airport is the guy in the very first episode. So I really did appreciate those little subtle nods. But I agree with all of you guys. I think the case has to be made that like we just did a G-rated the other day on Succession. Very different shows in terms of your view on humanity. But there's a case to be made for getting in, telling your story, and getting out before it feels redundant or repetitive.
If you, Bill Lawrence, the creator of the show, who also is the creator of Scrubs, for those of you who have seen season 9 of Scrubs, that you want to end it on a high point before you get in a whole new cast and it just.
Well, and it's like a lot of things where things become so popular where they want to stretch it out as long as possible. And to be honest, I think we've grown used to shows having a beginning and an end, and we don't want them to do that thing where, like, we're going to add on 3 extra seasons. We have no clue what we're going to say or what story we're going to tell, but we're going to add it on because you guys love the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought in season 3, you could start to see that scenario play out for season 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever. Right. Yeah. Like, are we going to get into that?
Yeah. So let's actually do that now, because I feel like Ted Lasso, we should go out on a high note with the things we'll miss about the show. But before we do that, we've alluded to a lot of the problems we've had. Yeah. So what was kind of your biggest issues with this season as a whole? Because for me, it dipped in quality. It was still a good show, but it dipped from season 1 and season 2 even.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. The first thing, the most glaring thing to me that really stood out, and this might be way off the beaten path, but the Keely storyline. Yeah. I just did not understand why that was even part of anything, because it didn't lead to anything or anywhere. It just didn't. She ended up coming back to the club and then going back to doing what she was doing based off the funding from Rebecca. So we just did this whole circle thing for no reason. Like, and at the end, basically, Keely's an independent woman, and that's it. Like, that's all that ended up being. And so I didn't really understand that. For a little while there, I was about to say the same thing about Rebecca and her journey into finding love and, really finding herself as an owner within that space. But I felt like they wrapped it up in the last 4 or 5 episodes pretty nicely. So I was content with that.
And the stuff with her mom and the psychic and everything and how that came to be.
Exactly. And then the other biggest thing, and maybe this is why I'm happy with the way this ended, even though I'm not happy with the way it ended for Ted. I did not like at all the fact that he went back with his wife. I assume that they got back together, and I'm like, this girl just drug you through the dirt for the last 3 years. Yeah, F that.
It really left the door open for that with the therapist, who has very questionable ethics, by the way, that she's dating like the whole time on his phone during the soccer match that like his ex-wife and son are going crazy for it. Like, leaves the door open like, oh, this isn't a great relationship. Yeah. And then Ted's coming home and they're very happy. Like, come on, man. All that growth and all of that therapy that he went through to deal with some deep-seated trauma from his past, I felt like it would be too neat and tidy for them to just be a happy family again after all that.
Imagine being that screwed up in the head and then going to the therapist, getting help, finding out that the therapist that you used to talk to is also sleeping with your wife. Yeah. And then going back to that house and having to deal with all that all over again.
Nope.
What?
No, sir.
No. And I mean, honestly, that's actually a big story in this show. And maybe that's why this season also wasn't that great, was I felt like they did a good job of talking about mental health and making people feel like, hey, it's okay to see a therapist. It can really help. We got that with his mom there and a little bit in the second to last episode. And that was good. That felt like old Ted Lasso, where you're kind of settled in, everything's nice and happy, and then there's this moment of reality, of where you kind of feel like, oh wow, like is Ted airing some feelings that I might feel inside right now? Like, holy shit, Right. So there's those moments, and this season didn't have enough of them, and I think maybe part of the problem is that they build more towards it being an ensemble cast and such, and that stuff honestly early on was what made it so good, right? So if you move Ted out of that role and, you just make it about these other people in future seasons, let's just say, it still doesn't feel like that's a show I want to watch as much without Jason Sudeikis, which it's still wild that this entire thing is based on a weird NBC commercial,
right. Those were so
for Premier
good.
Leagues. They were so good, but it's like a sketch. It's like an SNL sketch,
totally different
coming alive to be a show and then being one of the best shows you've ever seen. Like, that's kind of what it is.
Right. I feel like my biggest complaints with this season were, like, to your point about the Keely thing, it felt like so many of the subplots were a spinoff show within the show, and they didn't really go anywhere. Like, Keely's whole thing, the reason that she chose herself basically over Roy and Jamie was an attempt to establish she's good on her own now.
Yeah.
But I felt like it wasn't true to the way those two characters who were in love with her would have, like, handled that situation. It felt like they suddenly turned them into macho men just for the sake of, like, letting Keely justify this whole arc, even though she was pretty much just bailed out by the fact that Rebecca's rich and has her back, which is fine. But, like, the whole PR thing just didn't land for me, the whole relationship with Jack. And then Nate's arc, I felt like they could have done some interesting things with that. Yeah. And it just kind of fizzled, and there was way too much time spent with him and his girlfriend off the beaten path. It was strange.
I did not like his arc, because I mean, I think like season 1 and 2, loved it. Like you go from a guy's like, oh, like nice guy, everything on that season 1, season 2 shows he has the ambition, like a little bit of like cutthroat, gets what he wants, and it leads into season 3 being like, whether he turns the corner and comes back to how he was, or he goes down the dark Rupert-esque path, either way, you're intrigued. And I think so much of it, I was left after season 3 being like, wait, you're telling me in the span of like one episode, he goes from, he's top of the table and he sees his boss out at guys' night with 2 other women, and now he's back to waiting tables, and then he's back to being a kitman, all in the span of like 2 episodes. And I think to your point about his girlfriend, Jade, it's like, the more message I kind of got from it is, okay, you can turn your entire life around with the right woman. And I'm not saying you can't. Anyone who's watching, I'm not saying if you're watching, I'm not saying you can't, but
it is true.
But what I'm saying is, I think so much of the show, the rest of it is very much like self-growth and self-motivation and working on yourself. And I felt a lot of it is like, I don't know if he ever did work on himself, or if he was kind of influenced by whoever he was around.
Well, a lot of it is the support, though, of the people around you, too. Like, that's part of the team and him and things like that. But I agree. Like, Nate should have had the storyline where he refused to, basically what that coach had in the final episode, where he refused to go after a player, and
that would have been so much
Rupert
more compelling.
pushes Nate down, and then Nate walks off, and then Nate joins. Like, that kind of thing needed to happen more so than Nate just having morals about cheating on his girlfriend and not going out with Rupert, and then that being the reason why it ends. I get it. Rupert's a prick, and he's like, thought you were one of the boys that was trying to make you that, and then when you didn't do the thing he wanted you to do, he turned on you. But there could have been other interesting ways to do that. And honestly, I feel like I know that the actor that played Nate said he got so much hate after the season finale of season 2 that it's like, I'm a pro wrestling fan. Like, that's not something you can just get where people are that mad at you as a character. Like,
talent,
it's almost like they immediately tried to soften him the minute season 3 started, instead of just pursuing that, Nate being a villain for at least half the season, like really hating him more, and then having him have that turn.
I agree with you in that regard. Like, you needed to see evil Nate at the beginning of season 3, and I felt like while we got a little bit of it in the first couple episodes of him just being staunch, you saw him kind of break down. Jade obviously was like his weak point. And I wouldn't say weak point. It's just something that softened him up and made him more vulnerable. And then I did think that the dad scene with Nate, I did think that was the point where like reality really hit home for him. And that's where he realized all the mistakes that he had made. And really he tried to, and basically the entire time through Nate's journey, he goes trying to be something that he really wasn't, the Wonder Kid thing and all this other stuff. And he was trying to live up to that expectation. And then when he realized, I don't really want to be that guy, like, because he was seeking validation. And the moment he got the validation from his dad, I was good with however else it went after that. So I do disagree a little bit in terms of his arc. It could have been handled a little bit better. I fully agree. But I thought that the dad scene by itself, I felt like was very powerful in my opinion.
That was a beautiful scene where he's playing the violin or whatever it was, and his dad walks in. But it also, for me, it didn't land as the scene itself was beautiful. It didn't land compared to what came before for me, because the dad had just been an outright prick to him in every scene that we saw him in, and so suddenly he walks in on his son playing his childhood instrument, and suddenly his whole outlook on his son changes. I get that it's coupled with the fact that his son is the lowest he's been in a long time. But the other big part for me that didn't land with Nate's thing was the team's decision to let Nate come back was handled totally off screen, and we never saw that. And then his reunion with Ted, while it was a great scene, came way too late in the episode. He's just been walking around for days or for all morning or however long it's been, and they haven't talked at all.
I mean, they won 16 straight games. When did Nate join the club? And how long have they been walking around each other without acknowledging each other?
And even that was kind of like, I'm sorry, I not to get too deep here, but I was like, I always kind of anticipated Nate being the reason why they would win. And then because Nate Wright, he was a very good coach, and he coaches the other team well. Like I always thought that like they would struggle, and then Nate would be that thing that put like the secret weapon that pushes them over the edge. And they didn't even do that in the final game, which they could have at least done a little bit of that. Where
they ran his
the Oscar.
Yeah, I know.
They ran his play, but that's the extent of it. Yeah. There were just little things like that, and I'm sorry. So one of the biggest things that's charming about this show is how willing it is to lean into being cheesy. And it's season 1 though is a different kind of cheese than the mound of oozing cheddar that was this season. Because I'm sorry, the Sound of Music song and dance routine, I was cringing throughout the entire thing.
I loved it.
I absolutely loved it. I fucking loved it so much.
And I feel like it's divided half and half.
Stella and I were on the couch, and she was singing along. She's like, "This is so awesome." I was like, "It's pretty damn good. I do love this." So I disagree.
Well, here's the thing, though. There was a point during that episode where I started looking at things differently. You know, like we always want all of this media to like tell this great story, and we want no man. After a while, I just realized that they were saying goodbye to us, and like if this is the final episode, the final season, that was a great way to say goodbye. Having the players actually, like I know they did it to Ted.
We are going back to a Julie Andrews musical from 1965.
No, it was funny. It was a good goodbye, and like. It kind of like the show has been really silly at times, especially with the stuff that the players do, right?
Right.
I will also say that there's an argument to be made that throughout season 1 and season 2, they're kind of giving it, let's use a boxing term, they're kind of softening you up, right? and they are making you vulnerable as a viewer, and that way you feel compelled to not hold back in the final season and just be vulnerable with the show. And I think that's kind of genius to a certain degree because, like, as Derek said, you know, he was crying throughout the whole episode. Like, I shed a lot of tears. I was like, dude, this is so. And like, I don't know if I would ever have gotten to that point had it not been for seasons 1 and 2 kind of leading you down that path.
Yeah, you care so much.
Because you know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Right.
And you love these characters. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure. There are like Roy Kent is an all-time great character.
Absolutely.
Like the fact that he shouts whistle instead of blowing a whistle. It's hilarious. But at the same time, like I feel like the cheesiness in season 1 was like just the right amount. And at times these episodes, like the scene where they're all talking about the morals of getting sent nude photos, it felt very much like a modern like after school special type thing at times.
There were things like that. And I think that maybe, I mean, some of the LGBTQ issues they dealt with, they were trying to like also bring into what's going on into society now. And maybe it doesn't fit in that well, you know, because they're just trying to deal with a social issue on a show where that's not technically what it's about, but it is about that. It's about growing as a person.
But it is.
It is. It's about supporting each other and stuff like that. So I saw when a lot of that stuff fit in, but I kind of agree about the Keely storyline and the fact that when it was all said and done, there was just like very little there for you to go back and say like, where did that, what did that do besides take up some time in the show?
I hated her character. I did not like Keely at all.
And like, are you talking about the entire show?
I was just like, what is her purpose in the show? There is zero purpose to the show.
I liked her character the first 2 seasons, but it felt very contingent on who she was dating. And I think they tried too hard to write that in season 3. And it just wasn't interesting and never went anywhere. There were a lot of subplot, like the whole Rebecca and Sam relationship went nowhere in the end. I just completely dropped that thread line. Like nothing became of it whatsoever. And I'm happy she found her Dutch man at the end. Like good for her.
But when they were watching, You Got Mail, and he kind of glanced over at her. I was like, hey, let's go.
Yeah, never went anywhere.
Also, how awesome was it that they were watching You Got Mail?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Sleepless in Seattle is a better movie.
Yeah. And I feel like Colin's coming out was handled beautifully in some scenes. Like with Trent, I liked that revelation and the way they handled that scene. Yeah. But the rest of it was kind of clunky. And I felt like they kind of made Trent less interesting as they made him more cuddly. Because like in the first 2 seasons, he's a very hard-hitting like journalist
Trent
guy.
The Independent.
And and I feel like by the end he was this soft cuddly teddy bear who's
I love Trent.
But I think
I love Trent too.
I think part of it there is being a journalist versus like then he became like basically somebody writing the memoir of that team or whatever.
That's
right?
fair.
And it does like even some journalists, you know, like even some journalists we know on the beat kind of become more than just a journalist to the team, right? Because they're around him so much. And I know Like we have those guys with the Diamondbacks. So, I mean, of course, there's going to be that kind of relationship. And yeah, it does change. You know, I think felt like that's kind of what Ted Lasso's overall story was, is like, he's just so damn lovable. It's hard not to just be a huge fan of this guy, whether you work with him, whether you're, you know, watching the team he coaches, you know, and we as fans become that. But also, that's the reason why this show just seems like so crazy that it would go on without Jason Sudeikis, because it just can't, you know.
Last minor complaint that I had, I love Danny Rojas as a character with all my heart, but it felt like at times they were making him too much of like this naive little puppy dog. Like I didn't like at a certain point it was like, okay, we get it. He's naive. Like, is there any more depth to him at all?
Well,
and they tried with the Van Damme thing where he
then also the parting shot of him kissing the girlfriend. I was like, this whole time, buddy.
He's got that dog in him.
He's got that dog in him.
R.I.P. to that one dog. Sorry, Danny. But I think that kind of encapsulates like the complaints about this. Too many subplots. Some of the episodes, while I'm always good with longer episodes if they're good, but sometimes they felt bloated because of the stuff they were spending time on. But what will you guys miss about this show? Because as much as season 3 was a step down for a lot of us, like this show was, especially for me during 2020, a very bright, much needed dose of like serotonin.
There's a couple things I'll take away. First, one of my favorite episodes is in season 3, in fact, and it is the Amsterdam story. I just thought the story arcs for all the people involved was just so thorough, and you really got to see people like come together, like the Roy Kent and why am I forgetting his name?
Jamie
Tart. Like how they kind of figured it out together, and now, you know, at the end of the season they're like best friends. That just made me feel really good. Her with the Dutchman, Rebecca with the Dutchman, like that whole story arc, and how, like, you know, normally, I mean, honestly, when I'm watching it, I was like, this is kind of creepy. Like, you're just in some dude's boat, like, but the way everything kind of unfolded, and the fact that they didn't even sleep together, and she just left, and everything was amicable, but you could tell that there was a connection there. And then they meet again, you know, and so the little meet cute at the end, that was fantastic. And so I did love that. And then honestly, Roy Kent's probably the one guy that I could probably identify with the most. I mean, he's just kind of a hard ass, but he's in there, right? He's a vulnerable human being, and the fact that at the end of this, he finally wants to be a better person, not because he's an innately bad person. It's just that he's not able to communicate or relate to people in a way, and it cost him a really, really important relationship. And so he didn't want to repeat that. And so he's getting help. So I did love that. And then Ted, obviously, especially in seasons 1 and 2, like just to watch him, you know, everything's clicking, everything's great. And my favorite line in the whole thing was, you know, when they're the Diamond Dogs are getting together and they're like, you need a pair of scissors. He's like, what, to cut yourself some slack? He's like, oh, stuck the landing on that one. Like, it was fantastic, you know. So those are my biggest takeaways from this.
Yeah, I mean, the last, like you said, there was so much great stuff, like Roy Kent's poster being up in Jamie's room with the hair and everything, and with like that.
Keely,
posters just remind you of how young Jamie is, right? But I mean, there were beautiful moments like that with Roy Kent, where he just admitted, he's like, I want to change, and I can't. I don't know how. And I think there was a part of that where we all kind of feel that way. You know what I mean? Like, I want to be a better person, but then I've seen myself in traffic, and that's not, you know, that's not me. But like, I think that the admission that, you know, like asking for help isn't the worst thing in the world, and it can be very beneficial to you. It could change you as a person. Like, again, with Roy Kent, like the toughest guy on the show, finally at the very end going into therapy himself, right? Like, so
becoming a Diamond Dog.
Diamond Dog. But like, I love that. We've really, like, me and this guy, we had this moment, right? Like, me and him had a Roy Kent, you know, Jamie Tart moment at like Palooza, where we just became best friends after that, right? Like, so it's real life stuff. And I think the thing I'm gonna miss most about the show is, like, it always made me feel good. And like, I love Bill Lawrence shows, so I always felt good after watching Scrubs too. It was the same kind of thing. Like, the way that they had no problem showing how much two guys as adults could be friends, and, you know, all of that kind of stuff, right? It was so much of this show, and like Beard's dedication to Ted Lasso, and Ted just not having it all figured out and being okay with admitting that. Like there was just so much that was good about this show. But I'm gonna miss like those moments where they kind of did something in the show that made you think more about yourself a bit.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Reflect and be like, wow, wait, holy cow. I think I just had kind of an epiphany here based on this funny television show. So that's great.
Yeah. So many different characters. I mean, right, the obvious ones. There's Ted, there's Roy. Jamie, to me, I think seeing his character arc go from just the cocky prick on the team who everyone kind of either hated or shrugged off or whatever, to being an absolute leader. Sam, someone who actually didn't, like, when I look at it, didn't change in the sense that he didn't alter his character or his personality. He just grew within the show because people, like, you know what he's about, like you just the entire time.
He almost didn't change himself, and that was the part of him, right? Like
exactly,
he didn't change because of other people.
Yeah, I mean, right to your point, like the staple of a Bill Lawrence show, it's something where you're able to draw vulnerability to many different characters, call out many different either social issues or things that are almost those unspeakable things, and especially doing it through like male characters. That's something where you only normally see reserved for, if it's a female character or if it's a female talking to a male, whatever it is. Like, I think the way that this show worked, where they're having a literal locker room group of guys talking about their deepest issues, and yes, sometimes it was maybe a bit cheesy or kind of cinematic, whatever, but the fact that they even addressed a lot of these different things, whether it is racism, whether it is homophobia, whether it is just the straight up pressure of being an athlete, so many other things going on, they brought real dialogue to things that were happening.
What was your, if there was a vulnerable moment for you, what was the number one moment that you looked at and you were just like, you just kind of like lost it?
If anyone else has one, I need to get me a second.
Mine, I mean, I don't know if it was this season, but the first time Ted had a panic attack. Because I have anxiety disorder. So, like, for them to show that on screen, it was almost like, oh, I know what this is. And fucking immediately, I know this. You know, so, like, it's that thing that I think you can associate with personally where you go, wow, I've dealt with that, you know?
For me, it was Jamie Tart and his dad, and then the locker room scene where he comes in and he's all, belligerent, and then Roy goes over to him and hugs him. Oh my God. I even think about it. I'm like, hold it back. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, I was fucking done.
That was probably the most powerful scene for me as well. The one that I feel like is very relatable and honest and open about how important self-care is and getting therapy if you need that for your mental health, was the scene where the therapist comes back to her room and Ted is like, he's been missing this whole time because he had that panic attack, and he's there and he's like in shambles basically, and he admits he needs help. And I feel like it tied into the show's message that wanting to change and wanting to be better is enough. Like you're never, like they said in the finale, you're never going to be perfect, but it's just about trying to pursue that growth. And I thought that was one of my favorite messages in a show that was full of positive messages the whole time. And
I feel like that second to last episode where he does go off on his mom about that is so important to show like how mad he is at the fact that he held back. And we saw him hold back with the therapist for so long and resist it for so long. And that's because his mom was just this person that put it all off and just smiled through it all and never actually dealt with the feelings.
I think even breaking down the dialogue in the second season with Dr. Sharon, where he's saying why I don't go to therapy, why would I want to spend hundreds of dollars to just have someone regurgitate the information back to me where you weren't there when this was happening, my child, when you weren't there. And it's saying like, holy crap, that probably resonated with so many people, why they don't go to therapy. And that may not be a cure-all. People may not have seen that and then go to therapy, but at least opens up the discussion of it's on screen. People are already thinking it, and you're now seeing it be played out in front of you.
Absolutely. The other thing too, and I mentioned this yesterday in my quote when we were messing around with Lassoisms, the very last scene of season 2, or the second to last episode of season 3, when Coach Beard goes to Nate's house. And he basically tells him, like tries to he's forgiving him, right? And he doesn't want to forgive him, but he realizes like everybody needs a second chance. And that whole story about how Ted and him came to be, I thought that was very important, just because, like, listen, today's day and age, we got a lot of people that just hate each other for whatever reason. And at some point, that hate just takes over your life. And if you don't learn to forgive people and just move on, and really learn to embrace other people's differences, you're going to be stuck in your same ways, and you're going to die bitter, and you're going to die alone, and you're going to die angry. And it's just not a good color on anybody. And so I love the fact that they taught forgiveness, but not in a cheesy kind of like, oh, I'm going to forgive you even though you're my enemy. No, it was like a Full House. It was a real thing. Like, I'm fucking pissed at you, dude. But let me tell you about this fucking guy that you just shit on, and why why you owe it to him to come back.
And I love that for another reason, is because we all love Coach Beard. Like, anybody that watched the show loves Coach Beard, right? And what it did was it literally painted a very realistic picture that Coach Beard at one time was not a very good dude, right? Like, he's like, I stole a loaf of meth, right? So it's like, he's trying to demonstrate, like, he literally was a fucking, drug user, and there was a lot of problems going on in his life, and that Ted, saved him, and like, he's mad at Nate because he loves Ted so much, and Nate hurt Ted. It's not even like he's mad at him because he hurt Beard, it's because he hurt Ted. But like, there is something to be said again about the overall storyline of like change and everything, when this character that we've loved for 3 seasons now at the very last minute in the very finale tells us who he is and what this past is with Ted. And it's not a nice story, just like a lot of things in Ted Lasso aren't like the happy ending or whatever. Like, there's some very real nastiness to where he came from and what he was going through. But in the end, he has been this person that's been Ted's best friend and confidant and all that. And like, I thought it was very, very well done. Plus, the headbutt and the hugging Nate and everything like that. It was one of those beautiful moments that this show has provided us.
Yeah, and I feel like the finale, like I said, it redeemed for me, or at least it went out on a strong note. There were still problems with it, like the whole idea that Beard would get married in front of this green screen Stonehenge without his best friend in the world.
So there's an interesting theory to that has come up that said that a lot of that stuff that happened in that scene was maybe Ted asleep on the plane dreaming about the best case scenarios for all of his friends, which
he's wrong, because like
it's not.
Jane and Beard are toxic. Like, can we just acknowledge that the only couple that was toxic in the show wound up together at the end?
Yeah,
not much to acknowledge there. It's pretty out in the open.
Wasn't a fan of that part, but like I said, it was like the scene with Ted and Rebecca, their whole relationship, the arc of Ted going to therapy. Just so many callbacks, like the Believe poster in the halftime speech, the like Rupert coming full circle, him getting the chance of Wanker on the field, even though that whole part was kind of off the wall. Ted understanding the offsides rule was one of my favorites.
That was the best.
I will miss this show, and I will miss its self-awareness, because like even the first scene of the finale where it like teases the people that had been wanting the Ted and Rebecca relationship the whole time.
Yeah, I was like, what is that? You guys did that.
Was,
like, shit.
I will miss that about it. But final score out of 10 for both this season 3 and for the show as a whole, because I feel like they're going to be a little bit different here.
So season 3, I would give, for me personally, because I wasn't consumed by the technicalities of perfection.
Sure.
I would probably give it a 8.5 out of 10.
Okay.
The whole show as completion, I would say 9.9 out of 10.
Okay.
Just because it is probably my favorite show of all time.
Okay.
Because of how it made me feel. I think there's other shows that you're interested in, it entertains you, and but this one was probably the first show I've ever watched where I'm like, I don't know what I'm about to get into. I know I'm going to feel good. I know I might cry. And that range of emotions satisfied me.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of shows that do great storytelling, but not many shows make you feel good after watching them. And sometimes that good feeling came after a good cry during an episode. So I'd probably give the final season an 8, and I would say that overall I'd give it a 9.5. I mean, that's the first 2 seasons are perfection, and we're 10 out of 10. Yeah. This last season, it's just hard. It's hard to wrap up a show and have everybody like it. It's hard to wrap up a show like this that started on such a basic concept of like I said, a commercial, and the idea that this guy just had this positivity that was undeniable, but I love it, and it's been fun to watch.
This past season, I'll give it a 6.5. Down. I was down a bit, I think. I mean, to Gerald's point, I think it very much dipped in. I think to me at times it was overly cheesy. This is coming from me of all people. For those who know me, yes, I know that's saying a lot.
Wow.
The cheesiest. I think the first 2 seasons picked their moments a lot better, and to me, it resonated a lot more. So the 6.5 for this last season as a whole, phenomenal series. I'll give it a 9.
Okay. Yeah. It was a 6.5 for this season for me before the last 2 episodes. I think the last 2 moved it a lot closer to the Ted Lasso that I was wanting to see. So I'll give the final season a 7. The season as a whole, probably a 9 out of 10 for me. It's one of those shows that you will recommend to people around you because it's a quick and easy binge for one. Yeah. And just the positive feelings in this show are kind of rare for television now, where we get caught up in anti-heroes and a lot of drama and that kind of stuff. But that's going to do it for this edition of G-Rated. You can follow Saul at Saul_Bookman. You can follow Derek at Cap_Caveman. And you can follow Max at Max David Simpson. You can also follow me at Gerald Bourget. Next week, we'll be doing Across the Spider-Verse, so make sure to come back for that. We also did, for that. Yes, we also did ones on Succession and Barry recently, so make sure to check those out if you have not. But until next time, keep it G-Rated.